Tom, you now have a new biographer joining the biographies of candidate. Mr. Reeves has done your biography, and this chair, Tom, which he spoke about with great eloquence, is your chair. Are you mic'd up? Tom is mic'd up, and you all know plenty about Tom. I want to remind you that this is your time with him, so students, please come to these mics to ask questions of Tom, and maybe as Tom makes his way to the chair, Tom, I could ask you to just start with one question, which is to tell a group of students how you got into journalism, and you can rebut anything you want that Reeves may have said.
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, that when I lived in California, you had 20 million people who lived in the state, and you could go at least 45 miles an hour on the freeway. I've been on the Santa Monica Freeway for the last hour and 10 minutes. And there's a certain amount of virtue in being able to see Southern California at a slow pace, but I've seen everything. I got in journalism during the Stone Age of broadcast journalism, actually at the very beginning. I grew up in a very working class family in South Dakota. My dad dropped out of school in the 3rd grade to go to work during the Great Depression. And my mother, who should have gone to college, but they couldn't afford it, she got out of high school at age 16 and wanted to be a journalist. So as we moved from town to town to town, my mother was kind of my unofficial editor. She worked at the post office, which is a great place in small towns to know what's going on. And every night she would kind of come home and give us a verbal account of what had happened in town that day. And I've always cited that as the beginning of my interest in journalism, because it was the important, the trivial, the merely interesting, the human interest kinds of stories that she would bring. And then when I was a freshman in high school in a very small town, I was one of the 2 or 3 principal writers of the school newspaper. And then I got a big break. I moved to the big town of Yankton, South Dakota, population 10,000. They had 2 radio stations and a daily newspaper, and a pretty good high school newspaper. And it was there that I began to think boldly, maybe this is how I can make a living as a journalist. I was writing for the papers. I was on radio nights during the summer and on weekends and after basketball practice and football practice during the fall. You're reading the news and kind of keeping track of what was going on. I went off to college. I was a political science major and a history minor. Continued to work in television news and to freelance write for newspapers in the Midwest like the Minneapolis Tribune and the Sioux City Journal and so on. No one in my group of friends was interested in doing what I was doing. They were all going to become lawyers and doctors and go to work for IBM and for big corporations. That was the way of the 1950s. So I got a job when I was a sophomore in college at a real television station in a real newsroom and commuted back and forth to the University of South Dakota, and had a very good mentor there. And by the time I got out of college and was ready to begin what passes for the real world, I got a job in Omaha. Again, for a very smart, fundamentalist kind of guy in journalism who made me go out and cover the cop beat and fires and political scandals, and then as I would continue to do better, he'd give me a little more range to go throughout the Midwest and cover political stories. And I got a big break in 1965. I was 25 years old, and I was hired to be the 11 o'clock anchorman in Atlanta, Georgia, just when all hell was breaking loose in the South. It was at the height of the civil rights movement. Spent a year there, and then went from there here. Got hired by NBC to come to Los Angeles. And in those days, you had kind of a dual role. You worked for KNBC and also as an NBC correspondent. So I would chase stories all day and all night and on weekends as well for both the network and the local station, and then anchor on the weekends at the beginning, and then I became a regular anchor in 1968 and continued to do network reporting. In fact, Richard wrote a hilarious account in one of his books about the convention in New York City, and there was a passage about me in there competing with Leslie Stahl for an interview. But he also wrote in 1972, as I remember, an account of what was going on at the convention. And I was not yet a floor correspondent, but I had the California delegation really wired. I knew everything that was going on, and it was a very tumultuous time. And I kept sending stuff up to the booth to David Brinkley and John Chancellor. These are ancient names for you and your generation, but they were our two anchors. And they would use my name and give me credit for it. And at the end of the convention, John Chancellor came to me and said, "Tom, it's time for you to give up the good life in Southern California and move east and become a grown-up." So I went off to become the White House correspondent and got there in time for Watergate, one of the great journalistic stories in American history, frankly. Spent 3 years in Washington. Went to New York to become the host of the Today Show when it had a slightly different feel to it in those days. It was much newsier than it is now. It's not to say that it's not very good now. It's very good. But in those days, I would go off and cover the assassination of Sadat or the attempted assassination of Pope John Paul for the network, and then also do the Today Show, and then cover the conventions and the primaries and elections and other stories. And I did about 3 documentaries a year in those days. So that's kind of a shorthand account of how I got to Nightly News, and then I was there for 22 years.
Now, students, you're supposed to come up to the mic so you can ask questions of Mr. Brokaw. So we'll start here.
Thank you very much.
And this mic over there, too.
Yes. What qualities about yourself, personal qualities, work qualities, anything like that, do you attribute to your success?
Curiosity, I think, is a huge quality. It's built into my DNA. I was always a kid who was turning over rocks trying to find out what was going on beneath them. Interested in what was going on in the communities where I lived, and then eager to share what I knew with other people. So I think curiosity is a big piece of it. I think to be a journalist as well and to be successful at it, you have to have certain passions. For me, a continuing passion in American life has been race, about how we deal with it, how we live together in this immigrant nation. I look out across this audience and see all the various hues of ethnicity that are represented here. And as someone who grew up in an all-white environment on the Great Plains, but in very modest, to put it politely, circumstances, I was very conscious of the fact that I got to where I was in part because I was white. If I had been a couple of shades darker in my pigmentation, I wouldn't have gotten the breaks that I did. I just wouldn't have at my time. And I always thought that was so fundamentally unfair, and I was always intrigued by it, about what it's like to be inside a darker skin looking out and trying to find your way through society. And I think it's still a big piece of who we are. The other big drive for me was American politics. I was a junkie from the time my mother woke me up to tell me that Harry Truman had won in 1948, and I was 8 years old. And I became utterly, endlessly fascinated with the process of how we choose our leaders. And it doesn't make any difference to me whether it's at the presidential level or at the county commission level. I'm interested in that process, and I continue to be.
Hi, Mr. Brokaw. I was wondering if you can comment on the current state of the news media, in particular the blogosphere, how you feel it has impacted the state of the news media.
About the current state of the news media now?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think sometimes people concentrate only on the lowest common denominator, and that's unfair. One of the things that I remind people is that this is a two-way street, this business of reporting and disseminating news, and you receiving it, digesting it. There are so many more choices now than there were when I was growing up. When I was a young man, we had Huntley and Brinkley on NBC and Walter Cronkite on CBS in the evening, and no ABC News, and no cable. I had a daily newspaper in my hometown that wasn't terrific, and it came out late in the afternoon, and I'd have to wait for it. Now, if I were living in that town, even under those same amount of circumstances, I'd probably have a computer and probably be online, and I could get up in the morning and access New York Times, the BBC.com, Financial News, Wall Street Journal. I could check out my local newspaper as well if it hadn't been delivered yet. I could say, Today Show, Don Imus, Good Morning America, CBS Morning News, a lot of little Fox News. I could go to C-SPAN and see a debate that had happened the day before. There's an enormous variety of stuff out there. Sometimes it seems they're all trying to get through the same door. But if you're aggressive as a viewer or as a consumer, you can have a very rich diet of news and information from which to choose. Is there too much Nicole Smith on cable? Yes. Yes. There is. On the other hand, they've got 24/7 to fill, and they'll say to you, okay, I know you feel that we should be above this. Look at the ratings. They go up. So that's part of the two-way compact. Viewers also have a responsibility, it seems to me. I wish there were more imagination in how they fill the cable networks, especially. I understand the frustrations. They've just got to produce a truck every 8 minutes. And so whatever truck comes down the road, they put it out there.
Thank you for coming. What was the most difficult story you had to cover during your career?
Well, the hardest, I break this down into two parts. The hardest single day I ever had was 9/11. No question about that. That was wholly unexpected. We're still dealing with the consequences of it now as it plays out. We'd had hints along the way. I fault all of us for not connecting the dots about terrorism. It kept marching closer to us. We had the coal blown up off Yemen, a U.S. warship. We had our embassies attacked. We had Americans killed in the Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia. And in our own American naivete, we always thought, well, it won't happen to us. It won't happen here. And whatever else you think of the terrorists, they were very imaginative in how they attacked us. And no one had anticipated that. So that was the single hardest day I ever had. I think that's a story that, because of where we are now in life, does not get enough attention that happened not so long ago, relatively speaking, about the time that most of you were born, was the collapse of communism, effectively. The dissolution of the Soviet Empire was a very big deal, a very big deal. And one of the too seldom remarked upon developments of the late part of the 20th century is that we have a lot more democracy around the world than we had in 1987. Eastern Europe, the various stands, Kazakhstan, it's imperfect, but people are making more choices about their destiny and destination. Central America, South America. So there have been some profound changes in terms of people making decisions about their lives. And the end of communism is still a work in progress, as we're seeing with Vladimir Putin and how he runs his country. But 100 years from now, historians will look back and say, that was a notable development in American life. And I spent most of 1989 on a plane at night, flying to Czechoslovakia, flying to Poland, flying to China, flying somewhere where the system was collapsing.
Hi, Mr. Brokaw. I wanted to know, what do you feel is the greatest responsibility of a journalist, or is there even like a general responsibility that we all share?
Greatest responsibility is to marshal facts as truthfully as you possibly can and share them with your readers or with your audience in an appropriate context, so that those facts then are useful to citizens in making judgments about their lives and about their decisions. That's boiling it down. That's the greatest responsibility.
Thanks.
Now, news is not just about eating your spinach. It's not just about what was yesterday's, what was the underlying cause of the collapse of the stock market for the last 48 hours from time to time. And you know, it is also about the wacky things that happen from time to time, the video that gets your attention. I always use the example, this is a little dated for you, but I always use the example of Doug Flutie, who threw an amazing pass once to win a football game, still called the Hail Mary pass, Boston College, right? You've all seen it. Well, you'd all look at it again, because it's so astonishing. I mean, you're Trojans, you're football fans, so I know that you look at that. You may not look at the Texas Trojan title game in the same way, but you know, those are the things that you can't ignore as well. You know, life is the unexpected. I once heard a famous Hollywood comedian try to attempt to define humor, and he said, it's the unexpected banana peel that you slip on that causes. Well, that also applies to news. So it works both ends of the spectrum.
As an aspiring foreign correspondent, I really respect all the international work you've done, and I wanted to know which region or which nation you would really like TV news to cover more.
What part of the region? What region I'd like to see covered more? Central and South America, I think. I think, obviously, it has a huge impact on this country culturally. There have been profound changes down there. You know, we're seeing in South America, especially in Bolivia and Venezuela, to a much lesser degree in Chile, a move to the left a little bit. What does that mean? What are the people trying to say? Huge resource-rich region. Be a big part of our trade future, my guess is. An enormous population. Fantastic cultures. Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, Chile especially, I think. I've spent time there. So I think that's underreported. I think, you know, the rest of the world, obviously the big concentration at the moment in the Middle East. And we'll get back to more reporting on Asia again, I would hope sometime soon. I would like to take a moment, if I can, and tell you how to become a foreign correspondent. And
That'd be great.
I have a role model for you. And it comes to mind in part because I just spent part of the weekend with him. We have a terrific correspondent in Baghdad by the name of Richard Engel. Some of you may have seen him. He's first rate, and I'll tell you how we got him. But first I'll tell you how he got to be who he is, because I think it's so instructive. Richard Engel graduated from the USC of Northern California, Stanford. And he wanted to be a foreign correspondent. And he thought the Middle East was where he would like to be a foreign correspondent. So he got his father, instead of sending him to graduate school, to stake him to 1 year in Cairo to see whether he could stick and learn the language and whether he wanted to stay. So he went off to Cairo, and he lived in a working class neighborhood. I mean, a real working class neighborhood, which in Cairo would make South Central look like Beverly Hills. And he learned the language on the street. And he learned about the culture, and he was going back and forth to Israel from time to time, and he was then learning to file dispatches for the French press agency and for ABC News overnight, and then the winds of war began to blow in that part of the world. By then he was in Israel doing the same thing, and he put together some blackjack and poker winnings, got himself reasonably decent camera, and went to Baghdad before the war began, and lived on the run during the worst of the war. He was at the Palestine, but he was disconnected from any network. He was feeding some stuff to ABC. Then they pulled all their people out of there, and he stayed. And we all took notice of him. Who in the hell is this guy? I mean, he's very brave. He speaks the language. He's getting around all over Baghdad. So at the end of the first phase of combat, everybody was after him. And he came to New York to go around and visit the networks, and we all thought that ABC would get him because he'd been working for them. But I thought, well, it's a little bit like UCLA and USC recruiting the same great running back out of Northern California. We're all after him. Well, we'll make it hard for ABC. So he came in to see me, and I said, I'll make you a deal on 2 counts. You come to work for us, and we'll give you something that no other network can at the moment. We have a cable outlet. Your broadcast skills still need to be improved. You'll be on the air every day, getting better and practicing, in effect, on MSNBC or on CNBC. And then as long as I'm in the chair at Nightly News, I'll work with you to make you a better writer and a better correspondent. And even when I leave this chair, which will be happening at that point, it was going to happen, I knew, in 18 months or 2 years, I'll be around, and I'll be around for you. I just liked him that much. Well, I can't tell you how well he's worked out for us. I mean, he is so good at what he does. He's so analytical. He's got a big picture view of that part of the world. He came back the other night, and we had dinner and with some friends, and he was riveting. But it's hard. It's dangerous, hard work. And we've now moved him to Beirut for a residency, but he spends most of his time in Baghdad. And he communicates a lot with the sources on email or on cell phone and so on. But that's what it takes. You could take that model, you could apply it to Central and South America, you could apply it to Asia, you could apply it to any number of other places. And you find reporters out there who do just that. They go and live off the land and learn the language in the hard way. It's a hard row, but they get jump-started over the other people.
Tom,
Thank
before
you.
The next person, it might be interesting to know how many of you want to be international foreign correspondents? Quite a number from this group.
Get language. I mean, serious. I mean, pick a language, go get it. Mandarin. You know, in Southern California, more of you are inclined to speak Spanish, I suppose. But get a language. That really is important. Arabic is going to be around for a while.
And when you're asking questions, if you want to identify yourselves, I should have asked that.
Yeah.
Hi, it's good to meet you. Thanks for being here. I just wanted to ask you about, I think someone tried to touch on it earlier, but citizen journalism. With the internet has come this big push. Everybody can have a blog. What do you think of it, and what do you think it's going to do for the future of journalists?
Well, I have kind of 3 big views about what's going on. I'll begin with what I would describe as my macro view of what's going on. My macro view of what's going on in journalism is that we know that the universe, the physical universe in which we live and exist, creationists have had some difficulty with this. We know that this universe, however, based on the best science available, was created by what they call the Big Bang. There was the solar event that created the universe. In our universe, there's another Big Bang, and it's still underway. We're still trying to determine what planets out there will support life, which ones are going to drift too close to the sun and burn up, which ones will collide with others and damage each other, which ones are reliable as a destination on a daily basis. And it's fairly chaotic at the moment in this new universe of news and information technology. Having said that, it's also wildly exciting because it opens up all kinds of new opportunities that I never thought would exist in my lifetime. And it does something else. It empowers people to have a voice. For most of my journalistic career, and Dean Cowan's and Richard Reeves, it's been, we talk, you listen. Now we have letters to the editors, and we have occasional opportunities for what we call vox pop, the voice of the populace. But by and large, it's been a one-way street. Now, especially in a rich culture like this country has, there are some opportunities for other voices to be heard. They're mostly voices that are commenting on things. Some of them are just transmission of information, but mostly it's the bloggers or people who've got something to say. We're in the sorting out process. We'll figure out who we want to read or listen to, who's reliable over time. The danger in the meantime is that there will be a lot of people who do more than mischief, who want to do something really malicious and damaging to a political candidate or to a consumer item of some kind or to a personal reputation of somebody in the entertainment business or even in the news business. And it's very difficult to monitor. But by and large, I'm not hyperventilating about it. I think it's probably going to be useful, and it's mostly a matter of how we then somehow assemble this so you can have access to those things that you want to see. There's another thing that's going on, by the way, in accessing it. There's what I call keyboard narcosis. It's like what happens when you get the bends when you're deep sea diving. People get on there and they get the bends. They're paralyzed by the keyboard. They're just reading stuff all day long, whether it's useful to them or not. They can't get themselves pulled away from it. And that's something your generation has to be aware of. You have to step back from time to time. Richard has seen this. If you go to next spring, we'll be in Iowa, and next winter we'll be in Iowa, we'll be in New Hampshire, and we'll be in Nevada for the political primaries. Correspondents from across America will rush in there, producers, researchers, political pundits of all kinds. And they'll be lemming-like. They'll do two things. They'll all rush to wherever a candidate is appearing, whether it's at a shopping mall or at a school or wherever, and there'll be 25, 30 cameras in front of them and the people taking notes, and then the candidate will go away, and these same lemmings will rush back to their newsrooms or to their hotel rooms, and they'll get on the computer to read about what they've just witnessed. They won't go out and knock on a farmer's door or go down and see the banker at the community, see what they have to say. They won't go out and just drive the back roads of Iowa. They'll go back to the computer. That's a bit of a danger. If it were left to me, I'd probably put a time limit on how much time people could spend at their computer. It's a long way of getting to your...
Thank you.
Before the next question, it's 5 o'clock, but I think everybody would love to continue this for a while. So if anybody has to go, I don't think Tom, none of us will be offended if you have to go. But let's keep this going for another 15 or 20 minutes.
Hello, my name is Angie Mcgregor. In terms of citizen journalism, I'm starting an organization to teach citizen journalism in East Africa this summer in order to give greater exposure to that region. What should I look for in terms of moral characteristics of...
You're going to do this in East Africa?
Yes.
One of the problems you're going to have is that is their access to outlets. Think radio.
We are, yeah.
Okay.
It's photojournalism and radio
Yeah,
right
I mean
now.
that's where the action is going to be. Go and listen. Hear what they have to say. You're going to be, I promise you, astonished at the level of sophistication of their understanding of their own lives and what they have been through and where they need to get to. And the oral tradition is very strong there in the villages and on the streets and so on. And I think two things for East Africa. I've just gotten back from Rwanda, by the way. I would say to people, and as a kind of big premise, how can we live together? That's a big journalistic question in East Africa. How are we going to find a future together with the genocide that is still going on in the Congo, for example, the genocide that we were witness to in Rwanda, with the difficulties in northern Uganda? Those are the issues that those people are trying to work their way through. And what you want to do is to make them think about that, or help them think about it. You don't have to make them think about it because they're thinking about it. Because reconciliation and unification are going to be the twin themes of East Africa for the foreseeable future. That help?
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Amy Tenowich. I'm a second-year grad student. I'm wondering, what is the funniest thing that was sort of unexpected that happened while you were doing an interview or out reporting?
Well, there are a lot of funny things that happen along the way. One of the most notable for me is that I, through a felicitous set of circumstances, I was the only reporter really in the world at the Berlin Wall the night that it came down who had access to a satellite. There were a lot of reporters there, but they couldn't get their story out. We were there. We had picture and sound and all the emotion of it going on right behind me at the Brandenburg Gate. And there were two funny things that happened. This all happened in a rush. It was unexpected that the GDR was so, the German Democratic Republic was in such chaos that they let this announcement out without knowing what the consequences of it were going to be. So it gets broadcast across East Germany at about 4 in the afternoon or 5 in the afternoon. The guards at the wall don't know what to do. They've been shooting people up to this point. Now suddenly they're told they've got to let people out. They think, they're not sure. Big pressure on NBC. We're there. We're the ones there. I rush back to the hotel. We've got a little tiny couple of rooms there that we're trying to put nightly news together, talking on the phone to New York, saying we're in the middle of a historic story here, and we've got the satellite. Everything's gonna be okay. One of our London bureau colleagues was there as well, kind of doing the logistics of it all, making sure the satellite was in place, making sure I could get out that the lighting was done, and so on. She came in to me at 5:15 New York time, pretty late in Berlin. It's now midnight or whatever it was, and says, we're all set at the Brandenburg Gate, but we got a terrible problem. There's a huge crowd out there. They've swarmed all over the wall. I'm going to get security and clear them away. I said, Suzette, that's why we're here. She said, oh my God, what was I thinking? She was thinking conventionally. So I get there, and in fact, there is this huge crowd. And the East German police, still uncertain about what to do, they get their water cannons out like they would normally do, and they start spraying people off the wall, driving them off the wall. Now I know we got about 20 minutes to go before we go on the air, and I'm thinking, are they going to drive everybody off the wall just as I come on the air, and it's going to look anticlimactic? But one man could not be driven from the wall. He stood there with his back to the water cannon. He had a leather jacket on, arms outstretched, big grin on his face, and they turned every hose on him. And he so encouraged the others by his show of bravery that they all rushed back up onto the wall again. And the East Germans gave up. So I said to one of my producers, go find that guy, because he is the symbol of the new Germany. He would not be driven from the wall here at this dramatic time. And the producer came back about a minute later, doubled over in laughter, and he said, it's not quite what you think. And I said, what do you mean? I want to put this guy on the air. He'll be on the cover of Time magazine next week. This is a big deal. He said, it's Tom, trust me. I said, well, what is it? He said, he's a drunk who's been living over here in the woods. And he said, he's not had a shower in a week. And he was just grateful to be hosed down a little bit. He has no idea what this is all about.
Tom, Amy was the last winner that Art Buchwald will have known of the Art Buchwald Prize for Humor Reporting.
Oh, great. Monday, his memorial service is Monday in Washington. He was a dear friend. Yeah. I'll tell you another funny thing that happened. It has to do with, I've got a Buchwald thing to tell you, okay? I left the Today Show, I was going to go off and do nightly news, but before I did nightly news, I took my family to Egypt to go down the Nile. We like adventurous vacations, and we all went to Africa. And I had been on such a treadmill at that point that I was worried that I was going to get way over there and be out of touch, and there would be a big story that would happen, and they wouldn't be able to reach me. So I left all these numbers and all these ways of contacting me. And we got way up to Abu Simbel, which is where you begin to float down the Nile. And we had a young woman with us from the company that we had contracted with to do the tour. We're on a boat, on a large boat with a lot of people. She was a young Egyptian, and she was very earnest and very good at what she did. But one day I was in our little cabin, and there was a frantic knock at the door, and I opened the door, and there she was, wrapped in a towel, showered, just run out of the shower, her hair was wet. She said, "Mr. Tom, there's a message for you, and we have to get it, but to get it, I've got to send a man on a donkey down to this place, and then the man on the donkey will have to get somebody in a boat to take him across the river, and we'll get them at..." And it's very, very important because they've been calling from the Cairo Military Affairs Office. They're thinking about maybe you have to get a helicopter to get by. Oh my God, what's happened? Every time I would go away in those days, the world would blow up. So my family's saying, it's happened again. I sit down, I wait nervously. She comes running in an hour and a half later with this enormous roll of telex paper, which in those days it would print out. So I start scrolling through the telex paper, and it's got all this, what we call traffic about, it had X New York to NBC Bureau Cairo, NBC Bureau Cairo to the Sheraton Hotel where we had been staying, Sheraton Hotel back to Bureau, back to the military affairs, and urgent to get to Tom Brokaw ASAP. I get down through the whole thing. She's standing there, my family is in great tension, and I finally get to the message itself, and it says, "Dear Tom," you're too young to have a full appreciation of something. "Dear Tom, Elizabeth Taylor has left her husband, Senator John Warner. He will tell you his side of the story exclusively if you return immediately. Love, Art Buchwald."
Hi, Mr. Brokaw. My name is Jacqueline Cook, and I'm a freshman in the Annenberg School. And I was wondering, how do you feel about the rise of tabloid journalism and television stations like...
How I feel about what?
The rise of tabloid journalism and the rise of television stations that focus on news like that, such as E! Entertainment.
I'm having a hard... Just come right up here and talk to me about it.
Oh, is it... Sorry. Okay. So, how do you feel about the rise of tabloid journalism and the TV stations like E! Entertainment, and how it's changing the definition of what news means to the American public and how we should think of news and be informed and well-informed?
There's a phrase, it's called old wine in a new bottle. Mr. Reeves was beginning in journalism in New York. How many afternoon newspapers were there, Richard? Four on the streets?
Well, morning. With the 3 morning and 4.
3 morning and 4 in the afternoon. And each headline was more outrageous than the next one. They were mostly tabs. The New York Herald Tribune was not, but there were others. The Mirror, the Sun, Chicago, same thing. Here in LA, the same thing.
Still with New York Post.
Pardon me?
New York Post today.
New York Post today. And it's a popular form of journalism. It speaks to a big segment of our audience. When I get on the subway in the morning, they're not reading the New York Times.
Right.
And they're not reading the Financial Times. And they're not asking me about the latest development of the National Security Council. They're wondering what I think about Britney Spears and Paris Hilton hanging out together, or whatever. It's the stuff of a big segment of our population, what they want to read about and what they want to hear about. What's happened is, in our end of the business, on the broadcast side, is that these entertainment shows, in the Insider it's called, is that what it's called? The Insider, Entertainment Tonight, all that. They've taken it to a whole different level. And they have a right to do that. I always remind people that in New York, at least, at 7 o'clock, you can watch Entertainment Tonight, or you can watch The Insider, or you can watch Jim Lehrer and the NewsHour. You don't have to watch those other two. You can watch them. The danger is the creeping tabloidism across the spectrum. I know that people at CNN and the rank and file are worried about that because of the way Fox News has kind of redefined things that have happened. But again, to get back to this, as viewers, as news consumers, you too have a piece in this bargain. And you have to be aware of that. There's some great tabloid journalism, by the way. I mean, I love the headlines in the New York Post. The most famous one of all, I guess, was "Headless Body Found in Topless Bar." And that's a great headline. And they always win the headline wars, in my judgment. And so I kind of look every morning, what's their headline today? You know, what have they got? So.
Thank you.
I was curious, could you talk a little bit about the role you think journalism, particularly broadcast journalism, plays in a functioning democracy, and how news producers can maybe push back against some of the pressure to produce this kind of tabloid material at the expense of perhaps more quote-unquote serious material?
Well, I honestly think that if you look at the what still passes for the gold standard of broadcast news, which are the 3 evening broadcasts, you know, most of what they do on a nightly basis these days, with the critical issues that are before the country, are about those issues. They're about the war, about the debate, who's telling the truth, who isn't. A recent good example is what happened at Walter Reed. The Washington Post broke that story, but the networks waded into it as well. They certainly were critically important during Katrina and have continued to be. When I began, we were talking about this at lunch today, when I began in broadcast journalism at the network level, there were really the 2 outlets, CBS and NBC. We were a duopoly. We didn't have to ask you what you wanted to hear or what you were interested in. We put on what was in our best judgment about what was important to you. And sometimes it was pretty narrowly cast because all the people making decisions were white middle-aged men who lived on the Eastern Seaboard. I had a big problem in California in those days. I had a very senior NBC News executive. When I moved to California in '66, after I'd been here about a year, this very senior man came out. There was a little reception for him. And he said, how are you getting along out here? And I said, I love it because it's so much different than the cliche, the stereotype of California, in terms of what people are interested in, the kinds of people that I've met, the culture and the... He said, I don't want to hear that. I want the kooky stuff. That's what California's, that's what I want. I remember when Richard first arrived in California. He came out as a reporter, and it was at the bistro. It was a reception for Kay Graham, wasn't it? Did you? Is that what it was? No, it was for
Charlie Goodell.
Charlie Goodell, right. It was a congressman who was thinking about running for president.
Yeah. He's taking Bobby's place.
Right, and he was the senator. And I remember Richard had kind of an arched eyebrow view of California at that time. And I always knew that once you get them across the border, then we own them. They come out and they see a whole different dimension to it. That's an issue, and it still is an issue. I believe the biggest political story in America today is in the Rocky Mountain West and the Southwest. That's where I think the next presidential election will be settled. And it will be settled on a lot of issues that are not getting enough attention. Illegal immigration is one of them. It gets kind of a little attention from time to time, but if you go to Colorado and Arizona and now to Texas, that is a radioactive issue. And people have gotten terribly polarized by it. And they don't want to listen to other points of view. Moreover, the demographics in the West are changing enormously. You go to Utah, arguably our most conservative western state, but there's big California out-migration to Utah now. That's going to change the politics. They've got a very liberal mayor of Salt Lake City who's defying a lot of the Mormon culture there. This is going to have a big effect on the kinds of leaders that we pick and who wins and who loses. That's not getting enough attention.
This is going to be our last question.
Okay. Hi, my name's Kara Veit. I would just want to know your opinion of how Katie Couric has handled the role of
Can you
being
lean
the
in?
first female anchor.
Yeah.
I wanted to know your opinion of how Katie Couric has handled the role of being the first female anchor. Do you think she's helped and made a breakthrough, or perhaps made it harder for female journalists to be taken seriously?
Well, I don't think she's made it harder. I think she's struggling. I think that that's evident. I don't think it's because she's a girl. I think it's because, look, I've known Katie a long time. She's extremely gifted at what she does. And when she called to say that she was going to go do this, I wasn't surprised. None of us were. We've been hearing this for some time and all the indications. And I said, Katie, it's a dive off the high board. And she said, does that mean you think I'm going to crash and burn? I said, no, it's just different. I've done both shows, the Today Show and Nightly News, and it's just different. The expectations are different. When I first began as a nightly news anchor, I looked like I was about 17, and I was actually 30, whatever I was 40. But I looked young. And I had a hard time. You know, I was pushing the rock up the hill there for the first couple of years because people were wondered whether I had the gravitas to do it. Even though I'd been the White House guard, I'd been all over the world, I'd covered big arms control stories and everything else. And it took me a while to find my place there. I don't think that this means that we won't I think we will have female anchors. I think that this is a big breakthrough that will last. I think the larger issue is for the evening news, can it survive as a form against the internet and the expanded local news programs? You know, I come out to California and they're 3 hours behind, obviously. This broadcast was produced an hour ago in New York. You won't see it until 6:30. So do the people in the West feel connected to the idea that they've got to go watch the evening news? And there's been a diminution of audience along the way. They are still delivering boatloads of people, but that's the big issue. And how you marry the traditional evening news broadcast to the new form of the internet is going to be a big, big challenge. Look, there are so many more women now than there used to be in every position. Let me just end by saying one thing, which is that for every job on the air, there are, I'm not sure the exact ratio, probably 100 great jobs that are not on the air. They're administrative jobs, they're producing jobs, they're editing jobs, there are all kinds of jobs. And so you need to think about that as well if you're an aspiring journalist. Not everybody gets to go out and be on camera. And even those who do, you know, sometimes it's a fairly perilous decision because there are no job guarantees. You have greater security, greater flexibility in a lot of ways if you're behind the scenes, and in many news operations, on the broadcast side at least, the producers do a lot of the most important work. And if you're looking for a skill that will serve you well, whatever you want to do, learn to write. Write well. And write in a way that you're complementing, if you're interested in broadcast journalism, what the visuals are. Complementing. If you're a newspaper reporter, if that's what you want to do, or a blogger, or work on one of the internet sites, the oldest rules still apply. It has to have clarity, it has to have narrative, it has to pull the reader in and hold his or her attention stylishly. I'm sorry I was late. I've enjoyed this a lot. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Tom Brokaw, for being with us. What a wonderful discussion. And I want to remind everybody, we're going to have a book signing actually upstairs with Tom Brokaw and a reception. So I know a number of you want to have a chance to talk with him personally, and he'll be around for a while. Tom, thank you so much.